Well, hey there, SJWs. Or shall I say, wokeists. That seems to be the current fear-mongering term. I hope you all had a wonderful Cuckmas season. I bet some of you were real good lefties that earned extra wokeness points even by baking genderless gingerbread people without the traditional massive penises they're supposed to have. I miss the days when gingerbread men were unwoke and their genitals were visible for all to see in all their gingerbread glory. If you were supremely rational, though, and not regressive lefties, you probably would have spent this season curled up by a fire on a giant brain-shaped chair somewhere, tweeting your totally normal concerns about a decline in young women's fertility, like Eric Weinstein. Or, if you wanted to step it up, like Stefan Molyneux, who has specifically been worried about the quality of Taylor Swift's eggs. If you wanted to be a bit subtler, perhaps you'd have talked about how women are biologically better suited to raising children, like Sam Harris, the inventor of Logic and Reason, recently did on a podcast. Or if you wanted to go full Peterson, you'd maybe just complain about how birth control pills are destroying Western civilization. Now, whatever your extremely normal interests in women's fertility or their trad roles in rearing children are, you've got to realize by now that this is all just different shades of the same thing, from Molyneux to Peterson to Harris. It's about 50 shades of bullshit, if you will. The intellectual dark web, or IDW, can easily lead people to the more hardcore mask-off Molyneux garbage, and Molyneux already is basically half a step away from straight-up Richard Spencer garbage. And we've seen this very radicalization path shown through studies and talked about in articles, many of which I've discussed in previous episodes in more detail. But shockingly, the facts and data fetishizing genius brains simply don't acknowledge this, because maybe these facts hurt their feels. Or more accurately, these facts expose their power levels that they've worked so hard to mask in shiny new intellectual packaging. Why, just the other day there was a race science article in the New York Times that approvingly cited a paper co-authored by a white supremacist. Fringe of the fucking fringe indeed. So, as we can see, phrenology is in vogue again. Yay! Happy New Year, guys! Though the New York Times did do a really pathetic excuse-making, vague-ish retraction and grumpily removed links to that paper while denying it was cited favorably at all. That's something, I suppose. But speaking of phrenology, you'll never guess who jumped right in to defend the honor of this white supremacist co-author. Why, Claire Lehman of Quillette, of course. It's like a fucking reflex over there. If there's ever a racist being mildly criticized or a white supremacist being called as such, they have a bat signal for that. And immediately they're on the case, denying the racism, jumping through hoops, trying to excuse away white supremacy, splitting hairs about it, or, even denying that Nazis exist at all today. And just like that, they're there before you can even say skull shape. Such heroes. Jokes aside, though, in the past, in the pre-Trump era, which seems like a million years ago, just before the beginning of a new year, had at least some sense of hopefulness for what was to come. Maybe I was naive, or maybe things were a little less fashy then, But now I'm just filled with dread at what horrors we could possibly see next year. At the normalization of Nazis and general dusting off of far-right talking points in mainstream spaces. And to think that so many people are willing tokens for this, people I used to respect even, so long as I get some publicity or money out of it. Frustratingly and embarrassingly for me, the perfect example of tokenization in support of the right is the current manifestation of the ex-Muslim movement. Maybe it was always like this, and I just couldn't see it in a less far-right friendly climate. I mean, it was something I used to be proud of. I used to think that it had the noble goal of simply normalizing apostasy and non-belief in Muslim communities, which is important, but increasingly, undeniably, in the past few years, it's become a project very much aligned with the Western right, in service of maintaining the status quo here. The Candace Owens of secular movements, unfortunately. If they get their allies for Islam criticism from Breitbart or Rebel Media, from race science lovers, then hey, sure, they'll take it. The past couple of years have been a difficult period for me to try and find my bearings again in that regard, but I'm glad to have seen it for what it is, and I'm glad to have enough support that I can use my small platform to continue speaking out about the grifters and those who apologize for and push far-right ideas under the guise of secularism and humanism. It's something I think that's becoming increasingly relevant, important, and urgent in this political climate. And with a baby, believe me, I really didn't think I'd be able to maintain consistent output, but hey, it's happened somehow. A year later, and I'm still podcasting. I really didn't think I could, but I'm so glad that I'm still doing it. And I have some great episodes planned for next year, some new stuff I wanted to try out too, and a couple of really exciting guests I'm hoping to book as well, so fingers crossed. But I'd like to take this moment to thank those who've helped support my work so far. I really can't say it enough. Without you, none of this is possible, and I hope you'll continue to join me on my adventures in 2020. And for those who've asked, yes, absolutely, I'm still doing that postmortem on my episode with Sam Harris. It is a 3-hour episode, though, so it's been kind of overwhelming to dive into. I've made a start, but I think I'm going to have to split it up into 3 parts maybe, so bear with me there. I've tried to do it as an extra on top of the episodes I'm already working on, but maybe I need to take some time out to do just that, since a lot of you have expressed interest. So next year, I will make that a priority. As always, listeners, if you enjoy the show and my perspective, please consider supporting via patreon.com/nicemangoes, no E in mangoes. And if you can't do that, please consider sharing the work and spreading the word. Without listeners like you, this show doesn't exist. And with your support, I can do so much more. But anywho, now that's out of the way, let's talk about this episode. This is sort of a follow-up to the Halloween episode where I dug into a lovely cross-section of IDW type awfulness to set the scene and to showcase a small slice of the kinds of truly dangerous and backwards nonsense they're pushing at any given time. I'll link that in the show notes so you can check it out for a broader view if you haven't already. But on today's episode, I'll be chatting with a couple of Pakistani women who express concerns about the impact of IDW types all the way back in Pakistan. Peterson specifically has become very popular there, with all his anti-feminism and enforced monogamy stuff. Shocking that he'd be so widely embraced in the extremely conservative Islamic Republic of Pakistan. Super shocking, isn't it? And I myself have seen ex-Muslims currently living there who say they've rejected religion for its treatment of women and minorities, and I've seen them come out on the other end and re-embrace those things in the form of some Western right-wing / IDW quote-unquote intellectual. Just because they're getting solidarity in the Islam bashing, they get caught up in their other politics too, not realizing how they've just come full circle, how they've abandoned all the principles they claim to have left Islam because of. It's truly frustrating and just sad to watch. The idea for this episode came to me when I encountered a hardcore Dave Rubin defender from Pakistan on Twitter. He was a Shia Muslim too, a minority. The irony of him defending someone like Dave is just, It's appalling that he'd even be familiar with that clown in the first place. And I mean, you should have seen this guy, just dropping all the anti-wokeness, anti-left buzzwords you'd see in the slime pits of anti-SJW, Western culture war comment sections, or in PragerU videos or something. And you can see exactly where he's picked it up from. It's a sort of softer and subtler, quote-unquote, radicalization in a direction that you wouldn't expect. When you think of young Pakistani men being radicalized online, you'd likely think of Islamists infecting their minds, not far-right sympathizing YouTubers and intellectual fart sniffers from North America emboldening right-wingery, misogyny, and bigotry in places like Pakistan and Saudi. Yet, here we are. It's a thing that's happening. This anti-left language and demonization of progressive values, of inclusivity and diversity, of sticking up for minorities, of feminism. It's trickling into places like these in an entirely new form. People fighting those things over there have an impossible uphill battle already. But now their opponents are armed with more sophisticated talking points in favor of the same old bigoted bullshit. And they're going out there feeling all validated and modern for promoting misogyny and shit. It's been rejuvenated, given a lovely facelift. And this can have serious effects that are probably only going to get worse. Saudi channels have already cited Peterson to justify that men and women can't work together. I've received emails from concerned Saudis about this too. Here's an excerpt from one. Hi, I'm a big fan of your work. I live in Jizan, a city in the southwest of Saudi Arabia. I'm a reclusive person and I spend most of my time online. And even though I live in a pretty conservative environment, I was never really a right-wing person. And that put me in a lot of heated situations with my family and my friends. I've always gravitated towards politics and enjoyed religious, philosophical, and social debates, which led me to discover Jordan Peterson, Ben Shapiro, Milo, Steven Crowder, etc. I was 18 during this period. Anti-SJW videos were starting to become popular, and unfortunately, I was swayed by that reactionary wave. I feel really ashamed, but for a short period of time, 2017 to mid-2018, I held prejudiced, repulsive views about transgender, non-binary people, feminists, black people, and of course, immigrants. Videos of Ben Shapiro and especially Jordan Peterson, in which he talked about the Nordic egalitarianism subject, were often translated into Arabic and used to justify misogynistic biases and further solidify Saudi men's prejudices. Ugh. So that's from Hassan, and he goes on to say that people like ContraPoints and Sam Cedar really helped deconvert him from that anti-SJWism. But yeah, there you have it. Who knows how many others have been sucked in by those hateful videos and living in Saudi, feeding off of Ben Shapiro and Peterson, IDW-esque ideas. It's really a toxic combination. And just yesterday, I saw some douchebag tweet about how his organization is distributing translated IDW books in Baghdad. For fuck's sake. Haven't they suffered enough? Is there a more useless thing to send there? I got some serious missionaries giving Bibles to starving people vibes from that. Depressing shit. Sorry to end the year on this note, but I'm working with what I'm seeing here, and hey, I'm not a magician, and these are sucky times. Let's just hope that next year is better than this year. It's a low bar, come on. We've got to cross that, right? Anywho, the first short clip I'll play is from a podcast episode I did in December 2017 with Saudi feminists before we even had terms like IDW, or before we saw many of the articles and studies showing their possible radicalizing effects. And when conceptualizing this episode, I was reminded of that earlier conversation because while sitting in Saudi Arabia, weirdly, they were so familiar with the skeptospheric landscape and the whole grifty cast of characters. I asked them why and how, and they reminded me that it was something they had to familiarize themselves with, the talking points and the key players, especially because of how Saudi women are used as pawns so often by these types, how their causes and hashtags are hijacked and filled with far-right Islam and feminism bashers. They use women, like my panelists in this clip, to silence feminists here in the West and to portray any Western feminism as unnecessary and frivolous. So have a listen to this before we get to the main two interviews of this episode, and then just sort of chew on the whole thing a bit. Let me know your thoughts on whether you think the IDW could validate and embolden right-wingery in new, more polished and concerning ways abroad. We've already seen what it's doing here in the West. What impacts do you think they could have elsewhere?
Make sure that that program doesn't contain controversial subjects, and you're not impolite to people.
No, definitely not, Dad. You know me. I'm never, ever controversial or impolite.
Yeah. Okay.
Welcome to Conversations with your lovable, never pisses anyone off, ex-Muslim host Aina, keeping it non-controversial.
There's no...
They de-verified Richard Spencer, which is a good thing.
I know.
A good step in the right direction, because it's been so long. Facebook removes racists, Uber removes white nationalists, and so many others. So why not Twitter, where they have a large,
where
very
they
large
had verified
platform.
neo-Nazis? That was something, but sure, yeah. I think he's feeling disheartened now, too. Didn't Richard Spencer tweet... something like, I think I'm really thinking about, not tweeting anymore because this seems like we're going to be banned soon, and does this mean the SJWs have won? And it's pretty funny.
Yeah, I hope he doesn't tweet anymore.
It's really...
Yes, the white genocide.
I'm pretty amazed. I'm sorry if this is ignorant, but I'm amazed at how well-versed you are in sort of the Western far-right scene. Like, how does a Saudi woman even get to know all these people?
Because, we see them often. Because of Insaf Haidar and all these people, from the people they support,
Those people do affect us, do affect us, and affect our cases. Because as I said before, they cannot stop from, interfering with us and our campaigns and our hashtags, so we are forced to deal with them and to know.
And then we see exactly the connections that they have with Richard Spencer and the likes of him.
Yes.
Yeah. Got it. It's a pretty...
all those alt-right people, the Kyrgyzstan and all, PP, they hijacked that
an entangled web, so...
Yeah. Everything leads to the other.
So another,
Yeah.
And here we are.
And here we are, Saudi women in Saudi Arabia who know way too much about the Western alt-right scene. It's because there's a trail, as you just pointed out, right? People like Ensaf will retweet Tommy Robinson and Laura Loomer and support them, and then you'll come to know who Laura Loomer associates with, and then it leads to Richard Spencer.
It's not just Insaf Haidar.
Yeah, I know.
It's not just Insaf Haidar. There are these ex-Muslim women who are in Saudi, and they do retweet these things. And there's this one girl who says she's a centrist, and she's been attacking Antifa and attacking liberals, and she's actually used the term regressive left.
Oh dear gosh. I love that centrism often doesn't even seem like it's remotely in the center. I don't know if you know Dave Rubin, but he's a guy who's made it his mission to sort of portray far-right people as being in the new center. So
alt-right. He supports them. He gives them a platform.
Yeah, he's got a pretty alt-right friendly platform, and considering how pro-free speech he is, it's funny that he has threatened to sue journalists.
Poor man's Milo.
I'm still in awe that you guys know Milo and shit. What the hell? It's so weird.
This is Tazeen, and I used to be a journalist when I lived in Pakistan, and now I live in Toronto. And if anybody wants to reach out to me, I'm available on Twitter, and my handle is @TAZEEN.
Great. Thank you so much for joining me today. We were speaking on Twitter about how right-wing political commentators and figures like Jordan Peterson, Ben Shapiro, Dave Rubin, etc. have kind of been exporting extreme, regressive, misogynistic ideas to places like Pakistan, and that's really not what people would expect on a surface level, the West exporting extremism in a way back to Pakistan. But I've heard from more than one person now that that's happening, and actually I've encountered a Pakistani Dave Rubin defender who was plugging all the buzzwords you hear from the IDW, and like his timeline was full of Candace Owens retweets and shitting on AOC, and it's just bizarre to see, you know?
I saw that interaction of yours, and it was so interesting to see because he himself, living in Pakistan, is part of a persecuted minority.
Right.
He was a Shia person.
Yeah.
And his absolute and complete disregard for minorities living in the West was kind of ironic for me. That, like, what kind of a person are you? What do you believe in? Like, do you have a sense of self-preservation or not? And going back to your question, I personally think that it's less about exporting right-wing regressive ideas. I think people already have those ideas in places like Pakistan or Middle Eastern countries. They just wanted validation from somebody who's like from the West, who speaks English, because, you know, our colonial hangover is such that unless and until the person speaks English, we would think that they're not like as smart as people speaking in any other language.
Mm-hmm.
So there is that. I know people in my own extended family who have become fans of especially Jordan Peterson back in Pakistan. And I get told, because I live in Toronto, oh, have you ever been to one of his lectures? And I was like, why the hell would I do that? And basically it was always about like, it's people who are already misogynistic.
Mm-hmm.
And they think that if they quote a Pakistani Maulvi, they would have less currency. But if they quote Jordan Peterson talking about it and saying it in English, and you know how he presents himself as a sort of like rational man of science.
Believe me, I do know that.
So I have seen the Pakistani fans sort of like reiterate it again and again. Hey, it's not some like, you know, crazy Maulvi who's going on and on about like, you know, how men are superior. It's a rational man of science who's telling you, girl, sit in your place.
Right. And I mean, I've seen like Saudi publications, Saudi newspapers justify, I don't know, gender segregation. I've seen Islamists justify men and women not being able to work together, all via Jordan Peterson's words and lectures and interviews. And it's depressing, it's disturbing, and I understand what you mean, that they're just looking for justification. Obviously, this isn't the first time that they have come across these misogynistic ideas, so that's not what I meant by export, right? I just meant that it's working that way too. You'd never expect these ideas going from here in the West back to there in Pakistan, when people always assume it's like, you know, some Salafist mullah sending those types of harmful ideas to kids in the West via the internet, but it's happening. I have also noticed that the people who are fans of Jordan Peterson, I'm specifically mentioning him because people whom I know are his fans and not like, let's say, of Ben Shapiro, for instance. Not yet.
So, not yet. Maybe they will get exposed to it like afterwards. What I noticed was that they are the kids who have traveled abroad. They have probably went to college in England or America or somewhere, and so but they're also deeply misogynistic. Mm-hmm. So they couldn't reconcile with their misogyny, but also the fact that they say that they are like progressive people and they've lived abroad and they have like jobs in multinationals and whatnot. Mm-hmm. So for them, it was like they had the struggle within themselves that like, hey, we are progressive people, but we also like to have wives who stay at home and not work and listen to everything we say. And if we cheat on the side, they would also look the other way.
Men will be men.
Yes. So they were sort of kind of like looking for something, and then they found that in Jordan Peterson, who would say all these things, and he is a professor at one of those universities, and he is a psychologist, he's a man of science, and he is saying that men and women are different. Women are supposed to stay at home and have kids, whereas men will be men. And they are the sort of like head of the family, and they have the ability to make rational decisions that women do not, and so on and so forth.
And women will be so lonely if they don't have children, and lipstick is, something that's just mimicking your face when you're orgasming, and why would you put it on if you don't want to be sexually harassed?
Exactly. So basically all of that. And so they found this perfect, like a culmination of like whatever they believe in, which is like, Western education and calling people who are rational and like people who believe in science, but also being assholes when it comes to women's right or minorities' right or whatever. So they found this like culmination of all their ideas and presented them in a relatively articulate fashion.
So it's interesting that these are things that you could probably hear at some terrible local corner mosque, but that isn't satisfactory to this group of people in Pakistan that are Jordan Peterson fans, because they want to be like seen as westernized and polished and sophisticated, and so they found kind of this perfect excuse to cling to those misogynistic ideas.
And also, one more thing is that like they want to use him as a point of reference for argument with people like me, because if they throw their local corner mosque mullah, I would say, I'm not buying that, you know. But when they say, hey, you live in Toronto and there's a professor in the city where you live and he's saying all that, so, I won't listen because he is, but there are other people who might listen.
Who Jordan Peterson is now, but they might stump some others.
Yeah. So like they would say, oh, really? There is a professor in University of Toronto where I'm sending my kids is saying things like that. So that's the kind of thing that people would just stop for a minute and say, excuse me? Oh, it's Dr. Jordan Peterson who's actually saying all that. And he's written 5 books or whatever. So so that sort of also adds value to the misogynistic arguments they are making.
Right. It gives them credibility. It raises them up.
It gives them credibility. It doesn't give them any credibility, but they think that it gives them credibility.
Right. So you were mentioning that you have a relative that's gotten quite into Jordan Peterson?
Oh, yeah. Quoting a lot of them and multiple Facebook fights because somebody actually posted within my family saying it's year 2019 and people are still saying things like that and so on and so forth. So
they posted critically.
No, the girl who initially posted was obviously against it, and she was like, this is year 2019 and people are still saying things like that, and they're like, there's a hall full of audience who's listening to it and praising it, and she was actually quite sort of unhappy with it. Mm-hmm. But in the comments, there sort of there was a whole set of arguments and most of the things that they were saying was again how rational and calm he is and how the evils of political correctness are eroding all the honesty from people.
It's so sad to see those same things that are Fox News or unfortunately IDW talking points.
And it's so funny because when they go to America, for instance, they would be against Fox News or they're perpetuating anti-immigrant ideology or whatnot, because then they would be the people who would be directly affected by them.
Right.
But at home, when it comes to dissing women and dissing trans people or dissing people with disability, because they don't want to lose the space or share the space with all these people who are women or trans people or people with disability or people who have different sexual orientation. They don't want to share the space with them. So for that, they would find solace or guidance from Jordan Peterson's. And it's I don't know. I don't even find it ironic. I just get mad at it, honestly.
Yeah. And to me, as an ex-Muslim, I find it especially sad when I see ex-Muslims from Pakistan that are in Pakistan that are fighting mullahs on this kind of thing just embrace Jordan Peterson because he's a further away, repackaged version of these same ideas, and they somehow either haven't recognized it's the same bullshit or they're fine shitting on other minorities. And you kind of see that on a more macro scale too, right? So many Pakistanis will speak out against the bigotry of Trump, the anti-Muslim rhetoric he spouts day in, day out. But at home, where there's no threat of or no fear of anti-Muslim rhetoric in Pakistan, they are similarly anti-minority themselves without realizing that they engage in similar behavior.
Oh, yes, totally. I have always maintained that Pakistanis and Americans are quite similar in their obsession with religion and and the fear
Ooh,
of
Americans are not going to
non-existing.
like hearing that.
No, and I mean, like, I'm saying it. I'm not trying to sort of compare two countries which are like vastly different in terms of economic power and
Right, right.
international, but like in terms of like personalities of people. Like, I've been to America and I've lived in Pakistan for a greater part of my life, and I see the same obsession with religion, and how their sort of like social life is around church in America, or similarly in Pakistan, which is like around near sort of like close family members. They don't make friends outside that. They don't want to interact with people. They're always fearful of others who are different, whether it's Afghan refugees, whether it's Ahmadis, whether it's Hindus or Christians who are living in Pakistan, who are indigenous to Pakistan but different. So there is always this fear of the other. And I mean, like, love for weapons, procreation. Everybody wants to have like 5 kids and so on and so forth. It's so American. It's unbelievable.
As
But yeah,
like we see, like the bigotries are coming out and
bigotries
surfacing
are
now.
coming out. And like, there are women who were making excuses for people like Roy Moore, and so on and so forth.
It's an interesting parallel you see there. But to go back to Jordan Peterson a bit and your relative, can you speak a bit more about like what kinds of stuff he shares and what kinds of interactions you see on his social media?
I think there was an article where it was not a video, but it was, I think he said that like feminism is a false dogma or something like that. I don't recall it correctly, but something to that effect. And there was a lot of like there were people commenting on. I did not say anything, but I was observing it because I found it quite interesting. And I see there were some girls who were sort of like offended by that and saying that it's not incorrect. And like one of them was quite articulate, but then she was attacked by all the guys. And so initially there were some sort of like opposing ideas as well, but like because everybody attacked those girls. So if I go back to his page and I see now it's mostly like other bros patting each other on their backs. I'm like, oh my God, yes, that video was so good. And he made such an amazing comment and such an amazing ideas and whatnot.
Wow. I mean, it's very, very similar to what you see here in the West, right? And
Yes.
it's alarming. I mean, I laugh about it, I guess, as a coping mechanism.
It's so funny. I think I mentioned this to you before as well, that while they were making some kind of comment about like the sanctity of marriage and how the institution of marriage is so important for the society to sort of like thrive and whatnot, and marriage according to the ideas of Mr. Peterson. So one of the guys who again wanted to sort of reconcile his religious ideas along with his Western education said like, and you know what? Jordan Peterson is actually a follower of the Prophet Muhammad. His wife was older than him, just like Prophet Muhammad's. And I couldn't roll my eyes like every which way because like, seriously? Is that an argument are you going to go with? But apparently they are. And I think Jordan Peterson would be quite offended if he hears that.
Well, I mean, he's pretty openly anti-Muslim, so yeah. And wow, so we have the great Jordan Peterson and the Prophet Muhammad being compared because their wives are older than them. Well, because one of Mo's wives was older than him. Wow. Oh, well.
You know, when you think you've seen it all, but you haven't really.
Yeah, I mean, some of us, we joke about these IDW figures being prophets amongst these rationals, but here you are telling me that they're actually comparing them. So troubling times. And I was just watching a Vice documentary the other day, and it was about the growth of the MRA movement in India and how there are people who actually believe that men are victims in this truly deeply patriarchal, sexist, misogynistic society in India, and they think that it's inaccurate to state that women are at any disadvantage whatsoever there. I mean, it's ridiculous. And here you have these quote-unquote rational type figures like Gad Saad and Jordan Peterson who use women in Saudi and Pakistan as this sort of shield and a way to shut down feminists over here. Like, oh, your struggles aren't bad enough because it's not literal, stoning to death or honor killing. So be quiet.
I don't understand this universal, all these men, they get sort of bandied together. Like, why do they consider women as enemy when they are the victims?
Well, that's a very long conversation.
No, seriously, there is no evidence anywhere whatsoever in any, in known history where women were sort of subjugating men or something like that.
But that's, you see that often in, supremacist mentalities, right?
Yeah.
Of all kinds. So whether
Yes.
it's gender supremacy, religious supremacy, racial supremacy, they're actually on top and they're crying victim.
Yeah. But at least as far as sort of religious supremacy is concerned, I understand that, okay, at least at some point in past, for instance, the biggest resurgence of that victimhood I've seen is in India under Modi, where they were talking about good old days, before any colonization, even before Muslims came in. So that was the golden period and whatnot. I understand. At least they had something like that to sort of to remember. They were the ruling class, and then they had colonialism under first Muslims and then Brits, and now they're back at top. So they're talking about that. But there was no part of history where women controlled anything, ever, in known history. So whenever men talk about being victims, there was never a time that they can call back to and saying, hey, we were victims then, and we don't want to go back to that. So that is why we need to preserve this. And that is why sort of all these people Reuben or Gad Saad or all these people sort of come up and talk about it, and then they find followers. So I understand all that sort of playing playing to the audience for the victimhood in terms of religious or ethnic or national supremacy. Gender, it makes no sense to me.
Yeah, I mean, these things aren't very rational, are they, though?
Yeah, but they come from the rational men of science.
That's the irony of the whole thing.
Every time I hear that, I just want to bang my head against something solid.
Don't blame you. It's got to be your lady brain that just doesn't have the high IQ to grasp at their brilliant ideas. Mine also.
I will take my lady brain over any of that. I'm very happy with my lady brain.
Me too. All right, well, thank you so much for chatting with me about this stuff.
My name is Firuza and I live in Islamabad, Pakistan. So one of the things is that I feel it's really ironic that Pakistani young men, I haven't met a single woman who's read him and appreciated him. Pakistani young men kind of read people like him in a way they're trying to make a statement as well, right? That we're not reading sort of traditional religious texts. We're not drawing our sort of intellectual inspiration from locals. We're looking abroad and we're looking beyond our small space and our little bubble to broaden our minds. And so when somebody comes up to me, and a guy comes up to me and says, I really love Peterson, I kind of find it really ironic because I feel like telling him, dude, if you ever ran into this guy, he would probably say something really horrible and racist about you. He certainly thinks that based on the color of your skin, you're not as smart as he is.
Though
do you
he'll
even
never
understand
admit it.
where? Yeah. And do you even understand the broader context from which this material is coming to you? And it worries me because I think that people some of us sort of are on Twitter or follow things on the internet more broadly. So you kind of absorb the environment around a particular writer, right? Like, for instance, Pinker is a really great example of this. I had a book of his. I read The Language Instinct. I thought, okay, this guy's really interesting and intelligent, and he's talking about stuff and about things that I'm interested in. And then I realized what his other opinions are. And I was like, and who's the guy? Malcolm Gladwell. So in Pakistan especially, the books arrive and you can read them and you can get really into these people, but you don't often get access to what their ideas are in a broader context, or the people that they're affiliated with, or the kinds of intellectual arguments that they're defending, all of which in the current climate is really relevant to the kind of information you're absorbing.
Peterson is a bit different from Pinker in that sense, is that his stuff has become very well publicized, like his comments on enforced monogamy and things like that. Like, he is like the incel king, like that's kind of what he's known for. So it's harder to detach from that version of him and sort of just absorb his weird, shady Deepak Chopra self-help bullshit,
Yeah, but the thing is, I know he's incel king. He's incel king. The young man who told me, I've read 20 self-help books in the last 2 years, and the only one that actually resonated with me was this 12 rules thing, whatever, right? I mean, I don't even know what the title is. And he doesn't know about the incel movement. If I told him about it, he would kind of be aghast. He'd be like, what are you talking about? So there is a broader context that people like us who have a slightly more internationalized vision or version of events, we kind of pick up on this over here. But there are a lot of people who are buying these books and reading these books who don't. Khadi, the fashion brand Khadi?
Yeah, from Pakistan, right? Yeah.
Yeah. And it's like a total sort of liberal, modern, westernized kind of brand. And in one of their fashion shoots, they had a kurta sitting there with a copy of this 12 rules thing on top. Yes, I'll see if I can find that picture and send it to you. That's what I mean. These books are taken out of their context. People here don't know who these guys are. There are people who refer to him as professor. And I'm like, oh my God, are you kidding me? But they don't know. And you can't go around explaining to all of these people that these ideas are dangerous.
You may be removed from his wider Twitter or online presence. You don't understand the connotations of him holding like an alt-right Kekistan flag you don't know who all the white nationalists are and all the white nationalist tropes and stuff. There's still stuff that's directly associated with him that you kind of can't escape from. You know what I mean? You can't fully say that they just are complete progressive people and have no idea. Because if they're reading his book, or maybe they're just really shallow, right? When it comes to branding, it's about what's popular. So they hear that Peterson's book is popular, and so here's this progressive Pakistani boutique, and they're like, what book shall we put on there? Someone who doesn't even know what the book is, hasn't even read it, is like, hey, this one is a top seller. Let's plop this on. And they may not understand the connotations of what he's been reported to have been saying, that men and women can't work together, right? So that is absolutely bizarre. I did not know that. I cannot believe that this brand Khadi is advertised with.
It was on Twitter just a couple of days ago. I'll see if I can find it. It was on their Instagram, and someone tweeted it saying, what the hell, do you guys know what you're doing? I'll definitely try and find it for you.
Yeah,
but here's the other thing, right? Yeah. So there's a couple other things that kind of occurred to me as I think about this whole issue of horrible white people's ideas being imported here, right? So there's people like Richard Dawkins. Now, when I first heard about him, I knew nothing about his Islamophobia or his racism or his like Islam baiting and some of those really awful things that he says, right? All I knew was this guy's a really prominent atheist. And he writes about atheism, and cool, that's really great. People should read him. Richard Dawkins is really, really popular in Pakistan as well. So that's a balance. I don't know whether people read him and then also know that he hates their religion and probably their culture. I don't know any of that. But I mean, he's also really popular. So,
he's popular
there's that
for
as
what?
well.
For like his science views or his atheist views?
So I think that he's popular in the sense that people like reading him because in Pakistan, you can't say you're an atheist. You'll actually, you are wajib
Yeah.
al-qatl. You know
Yeah.
what wajib al-qatl is,
Oh,
right?
believe me, I've been
So-
called it. Explain
Oh my
that for
God.
the audience.
So wajib al-qatl is a concept. I mean, I have no idea exactly where it comes from, but the idea is that there are certain crimes in Islam that can get you killed. And being an atheist, as in not believing in Allah or a God, can get you killed, because that is, I suppose, what the greatest form of apostasy.
Yeah.
So imagine, I think about this, right? Imagine some kid living in Pakistan in a small town in Okada who just feels like, dude, there just isn't. I just know there isn't. I mean, it just can't be. And where does he find affirmation for his ideas or her ideas, right? Where do they go to understand that it's okay to think this? You're not the only one. There's millions of people out there who feel exactly the same way you do. It's just that in your little town and in your little sort of, neighborhood, you can't say this shit.
Yeah.
So I think Dawkins is popular for that reason.
So I get that, because coming from Saudi and from Pakistan, I totally fell for that too, right? Even though I'm in the West now, there is a sort of residual anger of like not being able to voice your opinions, right? So I used to be a big Dawkins fan as well. And I completely... I completely made excuses for him all the time. Like, no, he's not that, because you want to cling. You want to cling on to someone who's sort of giving you that hope, the sort of normalizing that it's okay to reject your religion. It's okay to be angry about it, and it certainly is. But they go that one step further, which takes a while for someone in my position to accept, I guess. But if this sort of Trumpian, far-right, bigoted... racist crimes rising environment doesn't sort of kick you in the guts and make you realize that there are dog whistles and there are times to be more nuanced and take care that the far right doesn't hijack your criticisms of Islam. Yeah, this is one of them. And none of these people, none of these atheist leaders have stepped up for that. They've completely gone along with it. In fact, they continue to make excuses for the far right. They blame things on the left. And their real enemy just seems to be the left, even in this climate. Yeah. And another thing I wanted to say is that in Pakistan, perhaps the threat of racism, the threat of anti-Muslimness doesn't really resonate, doesn't really feel like a big deal, because you're surrounded by Muslims, right? Your only oppressor is Muslims. So when someone's saying sort of dog whistly, Islamophobic, anti-Muslim things, it's like, whatever, it's not a big deal. You just don't understand the threat in the same way. You don't perceive racism. So that's why people are willing to let it go in those places, right? Their only oppressors are Muslims. Yeah. So I used to talk to a young Pakistani man who was a fan of far-right activist Tommy Robinson, like a serious fan, considered him a hero. And I'm like, dude, you want to leave Pakistan. If it was up to Tommy, he would ensure that people like you never, ever get out. It's bizarre that you hail him as a hero, but here we are, And so in the Western context, we have ex-Muslims. That movement that I was so once proud of has been entirely hijacked by this. And they're completely aligned with the Western status quo. Their biggest enemy is the left that asks for nuance, that asks for people to refrain from completely bashing Muslims. So we have like ex-Muslims joining like far-right groups like For Britain and stuff like that. It's really nasty what's happening. But sorry, I went on a little rant there.
Not at all. See, on one level, I feel like, if you're getting solace or some kind of intellectual stimulation, I guess, from ideas taken out of context, what's the harm, right? If any, but the problem is that, so for instance, what triggered my message to you was this young man I know who's extremely intelligent, has had a very difficult childhood, does not come from a westernized elitist background, and started reading Jordan Peterson. And I was a bit afraid, and I was like, I don't know enough to tell him not to do it. Let's see where it takes him. And I've known him now for about 2 years. So about 7 or 8 months ago, he comes back to me and he says, I'm maybe not so interested in Peterson anymore. Oh. But But at the same time, he started. So here's the bit that really, really freaked me out, right? He started talking a lot about gender in a very essentialist kind of way. So he would start making statements like women are XYZ, or the most recent one is women are really great at multitasking. And I feel like I fought these battles in my teens and in my 20s and in my 30s, and I thought that these matters were settled. I thought that settled knowledge is what is the mainstream knowledge about feminism and about women and about, gender roles and about socialization and culture and all of these things. And to meet a young, fresh mind really looking for knowledge, coming back to me with ideas that I thought had been kind of, thrown into the garbage in the 1950s is really worrying. And that's when I realized that this is where he's picking this stuff up from. Mm-hmm. Even if he rejects the book overall and the message overall or whatever, all the other baggage that goes with it, on one level, maybe the reason that this man is so popular in Pakistan is because he speaks to a very patriarchal, misogynistic culture, and kind of, frames it in like, these are scientific truths. I mean, this kid is actually saying it's science. And I'm like, dude, have you read any of the newer books on gender studies that have basically told you, debunked most of these studies that were used in the 80s to write all those, men are from Venus shit books?
And gender studies is the biggest enemy right now, right? They want it shut down from universities. I mean, you can disagree with whatever in gender studies, but to claim you're a free speech absolutist and a hero and a champion for even the most despicable types, neo-Nazis, but when it comes to gender studies, no, you want it defunded, you want it out of universities. This is the project.
There's a question here that nobody seems to be able to answer. Why are they so terrified of women? I mean, what is their problem? When you think about misogyny, really, it's like, what is your problem? Are you so insecure that you think that the moment 50% of the population is going to be on an equal footing with you, your idiocy and stupidity and mediocrity is just going to be shown? I mean, seriously, what is your problem? Right? Why are they, and why is there this new wave of a really ugly pushback against women? All of this stuff, like I said, I thought we'd settled all this. Where is this coming from?
They even are reopening conversations about like what is and what isn't considered neo-Nazism, and it's just everything you think was settled. Why is racism bad, actually? Why is the study of skull shapes bad, actually?
Yeah, oh my God, yes. Yeah, so what is happening? What is going on? Is this just the last throes of this sort of right-wing neoliberal capitalist system that they're just desperately trying to hang on to their power? Is that what's going on? And so this is like that last push because they know they're dying. I would like to think that.
I hope you're right, but it's kind of terrifying, right? You don't know until you're out of it, I guess.
The other way of looking at it is that none of this stuff actually was settled. It never actually went away. It was just that liberals managed to suppress speaking about this stuff openly. And, this wave of Trump and, Boris and Modi and just this right-wing wave of politicians who have no filters have just allowed this stuff to spew right back out. Maybe it never went anywhere. Like that, and that would be such a shame.
They're also inspiring people, right? And the connectivity with the internet allows these people to collaborate and find each other in a way that nothing else ever has. They never used to be able to congregate in this way, and now there's like far right internet groups all across different kinds of social media. They bounce from different social media to different social media. Like once they're banned off Twitter, they have their own, garbage versions of these things, but they still have a place.
Yeah. And in Pakistan, they don't even need to have a safe space. Pakistani social media is their safe space, right? It's the ones who are not like them who have to find their safe spaces to talk about like normal stuff.
And it's funny you phrase it as safe space because that's another thing that they're so against, right? Like a sort of a safe space for minorities or anyone vulnerable. Yet while all they want is a safe space for them to spout their racism endlessly without any consequences whatsoever.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think some of this also has to, in Pakistan at least, some of this also has to do with Me Too, right? And that, I think, is one of the most beautiful examples of a movement that was sort of started in the West that has filtered down to Pakistan really fast and really well, and has triggered all the kinds of conversations that we would never have had otherwise. And I think for a lot of young men here, that is an added factor that is complicating their ability to figure out this stuff, you know?
It's threatening.
I don't know if it's just threatening, because, for instance, the same guy who triggered my reaching out to you, right? What actually caused me to reach out to you was a conversation that he started having with me about, with Pakistan, we haven't really had Me Too in an intense sort of in a accountability way. So, for instance, there have just been 2 or 3 prominent cases, and nobody's actually been fired. It's all still up in the air. So it's, and there are women who are defending and all of that crap. But one of the more recent ones was about some woman who kind of, she released some DMs, and she was being harassed and all of this. And this young man comes up to me and he shows me this sort of a little exchange that he'd taken a screenshot of. And he looks at me and he says, women he said, this is what men are like. And I just kind of looked at him and I was like, what are you telling me? Are you telling me that just because men harass women, there's nothing that can be done about it because this is male nature? And he's like, yes. And then he went into these like sort of evolutionary psychology arguments about man being the hunter and women biologically being, and I just lost it. And I think I haven't read Peterson, but I have a feeling that this is where this stuff comes from. I picked up something about him talking about lobsters.
Did you hear about his idea that, what was it, feminists like to be brutally dominated, and that's why they like Islam?
Oh God. This man is mad.
Yes, he's
very
basically
just insane. So, so that's also what's happening, is that the framework within which these people make their arguments, things like, biology is destiny and all of that resonates a lot with men here who anyway have been taught all of this stuff. And now they have white people, doctors no less, saying exactly the same thing, So they're like, yep, we were always right. We knew this. And women should, so this young man's solution to me for women being harassed online, they should just stop using social media. And I just looked at him and I was like, how do I even begin to tell this young person who otherwise is a really smart, decent guy, how do I begin to tell him that you are so, so wrong? How do you actually do that?
And as a woman, you're just going to be accused of being like threatened or biased or something, right? So,
and I'm emotional because, of course, my hormones make me emotional. Right. And, I'm a people person, so I care more. I'm empathetic because that's what, women are the empaths and all of this. And and it drives me crazy because this stuff was sorted out. We should not be having these discussions in 2019. And yet, here we are.
And it's easier to dismiss if it's like coming from some conservative preacher, right? You're like, oh, please, he's just got these regressive ideas.
Uncle.
Or some uncle,
or it's
exactly.
Fine if it's coming from, because it's like, dude, you're a dinosaur. Your way of thinking is dying. I can't be bothered. But when it's a 28-year-old man, I think that, you have your entire life to enforce your misogyny on the women around you. And that really upsets me, especially when that person is making an effort to improve himself.
Right, and that is the threat of the so-called intellectual dark web movement, right? All of these figures together, they have rebranded all these regressive ideas and they're reselling them as these repackaged, shiny, modern things.
Science-based.
Exactly.
Yeah.
When they're just regressive garbage that we've heard from, like, ancient uncles and mullahs and...
Yeah.
It's unfortunate. And the irony is that they have a term called regressive left, which which they use for the left trying to push progressive values. However, the literal regressiveness coming from these people, the backwards thrust in conversation, in ideas, is all brought out by this whole gross, quote-unquote, intellectual, rational project, you know?
Yeah, yeah. The whole idea of the marketplace of ideas, right? And I grew up in an environment of a lot of censorship, right? And in my country, we still can't talk about a lot of things. So I'm perfectly comfortable with the idea there's certain things you can't say. But when they sort of start talking about, we must allow all ideas, I'm like, hell no. All ideas don't have equal validity. Are you going to tell me now that I'm going to sit and debate with somebody who says the earth is flat? No, all ideas are not equally valid. And this whole idea of a marketplace of ideas, so what? You go in there and you just pick and choose what you think is true and what you think is valid. It doesn't work that way. And it's a kind of gaslighting on a massive scale, isn't it? Because they've just completely changed the framework within which you can think and speak. And and the framework within which certain settled truths are just being disrupted because, hey, marketplace of ideas, freedom of speech.
Peterson is a climate change denier too, eh?
Oh God, why am I not surprised?
and another member of the IDW is like a vaccination centrist. So he I think it was Eric.
Ooh, there's a centrist. I had no idea there was a centrist position on vaccine.
Believe me, I had no idea there's a centrist position on a lot of this bullshit. I think Brett Weinstein is an abortion centrist, and his brother Eric asked for the best anti-vax positions and also the best pro-vax positions. So these people are making a real mess of things, right? And it's important that we expose and realize the danger that they're putting a lot of young minds in. And that's why I focus so much on the IDW these days.
This is an effort on a very wide scale to drag back intellectual progress so that the inevitable it's like once your mind is opened up, inevitably you reach that one conclusion that capitalism sucks, right? You have to, once you start treading that path. And maybe that's exactly what they're trying to stop really early on. Maybe it's like a sort of, they think that feminism is a gateway drug or whatever, that kind of thing.
So people like Dave Rubin and Pinker have all been funded by these Koch brothers related organizations like Learned Liberty and So it is a wide scale effort. It is an organized effort to exaggerate the faults of the left and minimize the faults of the very far right. And there isn't really an equivalent on the left that I can think of, someone that's massively funding this project of making the left look good. There isn't anything like that. So it is concerning.
Yeah, it is concerning.
And that's it from me, folks. I'll talk to you guys in the new year. I hope you found this episode interesting. Do let me know your thoughts. And share and support the show. Thanks for listening to another episode of Polite Conversations. You can support this podcast by sharing the shit out of it, making some noise about it, or contributing via Patreon. Patreon.com/nice mangoes. No E in mangoes. Also, you can follow me on Twitter @nice mangoes. If you want to make a one-time donation instead of a monthly Patreon one, you can do so via PayPal, nicemangoes.blog@gmail.com. Remember, no E in mangoes. If you've got an interesting story and would potentially like to be a guest, you can email me there too.